Okay, let's call this meeting of the Finance Committee to order, and welcome everybody. I think our first item will be if we have minutes.
Yeah, we got lots of them.
Thank you. Okay. First, May 7th, the short meeting that we had before the joint meeting. And so, take a second to read that. And then May 7th, the joint meeting, or our Finance Committee meeting, to which the school committee and select board were invited. So take a minute to read those things. Bob, is this basically the same narrative that we had looked at before with the change to have it be a meeting that we call?
Yeah,
Okay.
there isn't anything,
All right.
I mean, they put a sentence or two in more to make it more obvious that it was our meeting.
Okay.
I didn't change any of the content of the discussion.
And then the May 9th meeting, which Bob was absent, and I took the minutes for that meeting.
Okay, and we accept the minutes as presented.
And I will second that motion. And then any further discussion on these? If not, then all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
No?
No, okay, thank you very much. The next item we have for today is that we have just a few budget items to take a formal vote on. We voted on most of them at two other meetings that we'd had, and we left a few items till today. They are, Bob, the votes on the 3 enterprise funds?
3 enterprise funds.
Yeah. And we've had discussion on those, and the figures haven't changed on the enterprise funds. There were a few other figures that changed, but figures in the enterprise funds hadn't changed. So I would take a motion to accept those figures as written.
So moved.
Second.
Any further discussion? If not, then all in favor?
Aye.
The next thing was that I'm not certain whether the treasurer's budget that we voted on last time, we had been given the $3,000 extra.
Yeah,
Had we? Okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. So then we're all set. We're all set with that. Okay, that takes care of the formal kind of things. I want to talk next about the joint meeting we have coming up. I had a quick conversation with Chris today about who was going to call the meeting, and he suggested that we could write to the select board. So I put together this little draft, and just take a look at it and see if this about covers what we think.
Yeah, the only thing I may add is structure problems between guidelines and budgets. I would add something like, in addition to seeking, to exploring other potential sources of income for the town. Because that's gonna be that's gonna be the real discussion. So.
Okay, let me say, it's the process of determining guidelines for budgets and capital expenditures as well as additional sources of income.
Yeah. Yeah, for the various towns and departments.
I'm not sure that that's what everybody thinks a meeting's gonna be about.
No, I'm pretty sure.
We do,
We
all
do.
right? We do.
But I think the school committee now does too.
I think
Well,
school
no,
committee
but
does.
remember, it came up with a discussion about what was the future
Of the town.
the premise was that we would never build a new high school,
Yeah,
so how are we gonna
yeah.
deal with
But
that
even when we had
level of
the,
education?
even when the joint meeting of the select board, you know, I think it was pretty clear, we were talking about how to grow the pie. You know, we talked about that a lot. You know, so I think it would be part of that, so. And here's the other reason.
Well, the question is, that's part of it, obviously. Or that might be a
The
solution to
solution,
the overall problem.
Yeah,
But if the other people aren't expecting us,
Well-
expecting that, and what they're thinking is, going back to the meeting you fellows weren't at,
mm-hmm,
there was talk about a short-term solution and a long-term solution.
mm-hmm.
So it may very well be that what they're expecting is, we're gonna talk about the long-term solution for the schools,
Mm-hmm.
not for the town.
Well, but don't forget, we made it really clear at the last meeting with the school committee, this is not a school committee problem anymore. It's a town-wide problem and solutions for the whole town. And the reason I would suggest we put this language in here now is this, in essence, going to the select board and saying, select board, here's what we think is gonna happen. And, you know, that sets the tone. So that's, I think, yeah, I agree. Maybe they don't think that's gonna happen, but I think we need to drive the bus in terms of that. And I think that's why that language is important.
Well, I think another way to put it would be that it'll give them an opportunity at the very beginning to make their comments known,
Yeah.
and make their position known about what it is that's happening. It would be better to have some little bit of inkling as to what we're going to be doing, rather than having a lot of time.
Because I
spent
think if we
first
don't
meeting
put
to
it in,
discuss
here's what's gonna happen, or what potentially could happen. If we don't put it in, it could be, all right, fine, let's go back to the same old methodology we've been using all along, et cetera, let's look for grants, let's, you know, that type of stuff. All which we know doesn't work anymore, you know, so it's time to rethink the whole direction.
I don't differ.
I know you
differ with
I know
that.
you don't.
The
I'm just saying-
question is, how do you get into that?
Well, I think you start with this, you start with,
I think it may be starting a little too strong.
you can always back off, you can never necessarily advance.
I'm not sure that it's the position of the finance committee to call the shot.
No, it's not our position to call the shot, but it probably, it's helpful, I think, for us to set what could be the expectations.
I think that the last meeting we had with the school committee, I'm pretty sure I got the sense that they understood that we couldn't talk just about the school budget, because if you talk about the school budget by itself and not worry about the rest of the town, then essentially you're doing either one of two things. You're either saying that the rest of the town budget's a fair game,
Mm-hmm.
or else you're saying that we really think of the town as being two separate pieces,
Yeah.
two separate sets of operations,
We can't do that anymore.
and I don't think that that's possible.
And I think they agree that that's.
Because the byproduct of that would be, or consequence of that would be, that whenever we think of a new source of income for the town, the question is that new source of income automatically dedicated to the schools? Is it automatically dedicated to the town? Is it automatically split up by a formula? How is it decided? And I think those are the kinds of things that it'd be better to have people talking about in the beginning, or else this will just be window dressing.
That's what I'm afraid of. I'm afraid that if we don't make it clear up front, at least what we hope the expectations of the agenda is gonna be, it's gonna fall into the endless talk of the old way of doing it and be window dressing. In which case, you know, we're gonna be fighting the same battle time after time after time.
Now, us using this language now does not set that as the agenda piece.
Well, the select board sets the agenda.
But it does say that it's our understanding from our conversations that this is necessary, and whether you're talking about long-term or short-term solutions for the schools, that it's got to be part of it.
I think they're all expecting this to come up. I think the school committee very clearly so, and then it's the you know, select.
Well, I gotta say I differ, you know, I really think it's the responsibility of the selectmen
Okay, but this,
to pick the ball up and do it, and
couldn't agree with you more. But this is a letter saying to the selectmen, hey, we're gonna schedule a meeting, and this is what we understand we're talking about. Well, now I'm gonna
I would
do,
not be happy if I received that letter and I were a selectman.
okay. Well, maybe it's okay they're not that happy. We're in a mess.
Well, would you change this draft? Would you subtract something from it?
I mean, or we could just send a letter saying.
I don't know.
We could just send a letter saying, who's gonna set the June 14th meeting, us or you?
For the school committee.
Yeah. Because I don't want us all show up on June 14th and just like spinning our wheels.
We're going to.
Not necessarily.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. I have some thoughts about that, but
Well, the kinds of things we're talking about, I think everyone, I would believe everyone understands that the three parties that have shown the most interest in this so far, the select board and the school committee and the finance committee, are going to have to do an investigation of these things separately if they're not done jointly. I think that's another way to look at it. That there are things that need to be discussed, things that need to be thought about, things that need to be argued through, that for the finance committee to do its job, we know we need to know certain things, which we're not part of what the process is right now. And we need to know, we need to have it clear that the town can be made to understand certain financial information about the town that it doesn't necessarily think is important to know right now. And I think the schools would certainly argue pretty much the same sort of thing, because they've put forth some ideas which we do not necessarily agree are accurate statements, but it informs that it's or misinforms some of the conversations that go on. So I think it's to everybody's benefit to recognize that these things are going to be done anyway, and it's much more efficient and much more likely to come to a reasonable sort of discussion if they're done by the three groups together.
yeah, I mean, Bob, I'm reading this paragraph, and all this paragraph basically says is, here's what we talked about in these other joint meetings, okay? That's in essence the gist of what this is. And we agreed on June 14th date to talk about it some more. And one of the things that we did talk about at all those other meetings was other potential sources of income. That's why I'm saying put it in there, because it's a more accurate picture of what we actually talked about.
I go back to where I started. I'm not sure that when that meeting was set up,
Yeah.
that was really on the table,
Okay.
all right? No question, we've talked about it since.
Oh, and,
You've been quite
no, I think we talked about it.
specifically talking about
I
it.
think we talked about it at the joint meeting. I remember talking about it, and we certainly talked about it with the school committee, because we talked about online high school as a potential alternative and stuff like that.
Yeah, but.
Yeah,
well,
so I think my memory of it was, this is where I wish I was a trial lawyer, so I could turn to the stenographer and say, can you please read back the record?
You see, the subject you want in here is one that you feel very strongly about, and I've got somewhat of a different opinion.
Yeah,
Yes, we need the money.
yeah.
However,
How we get it.
municipalities running businesses very frequently don't work out too well.
No, that's true, but it did work out the one time we did it before with the dump.
Well, that was an entirely different situation. We backed into that one.
Okay, but it was public-private. It was a public-private partnership, and that's what I'm thinking we should explore.
You know, we could do, what do we do this? At the May 7th meeting, so-and-so, overall financial structure, Granby. period. It will be necessary to look at all possible sources of income as part of determining guidelines for budgets and capital expenditures of various town departments.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I'm not gonna argue forever.
Okay, all right, we'll do it that way. And we don't know until we start looking. No, I agree with you, a lot of the stuff will not launch, no question about it. But it doesn't mean that we shouldn't try to find a solution. In the process of doing that, we may come across other alternatives that are more traditional. That's all. And the alternative traditions we've looked at so far haven't been working.
No. But we backed into the landfill.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they wanted a site assignment,
Mm-hmm.
and we said we'd give it to them,
Mm-hmm.
but what was the compensation going to be?
Mm-hmm.
And then we negotiated a second contract,
Mm-hmm.
which is when we really started getting,
Yeah, gaining the money. But in that,
Mr. Hochschild and
yeah.
I and
Yeah.
Mr. Johnson
Yeah,
did that.
you backed into it, but in essence, it still worked out. That model worked before. Can we replicate that model in other arenas? That's kind of what I'm thinking.
If we make that next sentence, it will be necessary to consider the sources and amounts of possible income for Granby as part of the process of determining guidelines and so on. And that certainly covers new sources, but it does in fact cover the current
Yeah,
sources,
current
which is
sources
one
too.
of the current questions which is always asked. Is free cash of $2 million a year a normal occurrence, or is free cash of $300,000 a year a normal occurrence? And so that then gets, it'll work our way back into saying we were very, very lucky for all those years when we were in partnership, a business partnership with a company that provided a tremendous amount of income for Granby. And to the extent that has influenced people's thinking as to how much money is available or should be available for Granby to spend, we have to either find a way to replace that, or we have to change the expectations of the town for expenditures. And that way it doesn't specifically.
When you just mentioned free cash, going back to our last meeting,
Mm-hmm.
the school committee kept looking for a way to not have to have a two-thirds vote. So since they were unable to get any of the free cash from 2017, in other words, what was available this year,
Mm-hmm.
what they want to do is find a way to make sure we don't get any free cash next year and they get it this year.
That's why we have to have a meeting in June.
Yeah.
Among other things.
And when you look at your sources of income for the upcoming year, I don't think you can schedule free cash as one of those, can you? You can't say that we expect to have $400,000 of free cash next year, so we want to allocate it now instead of waiting for next year.
Well, to some degree you can. Because
Well, you can-
if you know that you're taking a conservative approach on estimating your revenue, you could take a less conservative approach and end up with more revenue available for this year. The net effect of that is that whatever excess there was won't be available next year because you used it this year.
Mm-hmm.
That's assuming you can predict with certainty the sources of income other than property taxes, which are tough enough in itself to predict because defaults
And you
and
really
so on.
can't. I mean, a lot of it's grant-based and they go away.
Yes and no. I mean, depends what you're talking about and how close you wanna get to the.
See, the other thing that's got to be covered, I think, as part of the study is some kind of realistic understanding of what the whole money allocation process is in time for Granby. It's very handy to think of, well, specifically, free cash shows up here, and annual budget is done here, and that's the end of the story. But it's not. think we're gonna have to put together on some basis where people can see the amounts of money involved, how much we spend, how much we authorize to be spent after town meeting takes place. You know, and the obvious example, of course, is authorized $60 million to be spent on the school, not part of any budget process originally.
So on June 14th, are we just planning to show up and it's gonna be a bull session with someone
Well,
facilitating?
let's do the
or-
next, we'll
Yeah.
get into the next
Yeah.
thing I wanna talk about here, but, if,
You okay with this change?
if you're okay with this change, I'll go ahead and, email this out. Email this out tonight. Okay, the next thing was that, as we all know from experience, when you get a group of people together, a committee together as large as the combination of the school committee and the finance committee and the select board, and then a couple of key advisors for those groups, a real mess pretty quick. So what I hope that we could do would be to offer, or prepared to discuss, to offer some kinds of things for people to think about right in the very beginning that are going to be necessary to be able to have a productive group of people working together. And so I just wrote down 3 or 4 categories of things which I think have to be talked about right in the very beginning. We can't just jump in and say, okay, what's the free cash situation? But the kinds of things that a committee needs in order to be able to go about doing its work in a productive fashion. And that included, right from the very beginning, what are the objectives of this, call it a joint task force, it's just a made-up appellation for today for us. But what are the objectives of it? And I'd just like to do some brainstorming with us, and we're going to do the same thing tomorrow night. And we had Scott on what we might recommend people consider as the objectives of this group. The second thing is, should the membership be expanded, and if so, to whom? There are other parties in town, other bodies in town that may feel that they have a strong interest in this, and I think it ought to at least be discussed as to whether or not there's a formal place for other groups, or what the process will be to communicate other than just through the camera of what's going on at the meetings. The kind of procedures that should be followed, and by procedures I mean such things as how often do we expect to meet, when do we expect to wrap this up, do we have any guidelines or goalposts along the way? Are there going to be subcommittees that are going to, because there's a lot of work that's going to have to be done. Are there going to be subcommittees that are formed to go off and do certain things? Are we thinking about the possibility of hiring in a consultant at any point for various kinds of things? And then also things that we know already, what kind of information would release we'd like to see be gathered as part of this process. So
I mean, the objective should be put the town on sound financial footing, explore alternative and additional sources of income, and set and modernize financial reporting and financial responsibility for the entire town, as opposed to separate departments, so to speak.
Okay. Any other kinds of ideas on the objectives? What guidelines rather than hard rules, or
Well, I think
where
that's the aspirate. I think this is the kind of question that's sort of, it's an aspirational question. And I think that hard rules and guidelines would come out of the discussion that we have centered around this aspiration.
Okay, anything else around objectives of the task force?
What do you think, Bob?
Well, one of the things we started with was continuing to provide an education.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
if we feel that there's gonna be a decline in the ability of the physical plant to take care of the students,
Mm-hmm.
somehow or other that has to get resolved.
Mm-hmm.
Lots of money would solve the problem, but
Yeah.
as a practical matter, I don't think we're ever gonna get the kind of money necessary to
I don't
support the debt on a new high school.
I don't either, but I think part of the process is to explore all options in terms of enhancing and growing the pie. And people come to the realization that there's a limit. It's easier to talk about harder budget decisions like that. On membership,
Wait
okay,
a minute, because I think that this is, I want to write some of these things down so that people have it in front to look at them. The question of how to provide an education for Granby children, what kind of education should be provided, is matched up on the other side by what kind of services are the town people expecting and should be provided.
And I think if you're gonna put that into one overall arching question, it ought to be something like, how can we improve the quality of life in Granby for Granby townspeople? What can we do to make Granby the best town to live in possible?
Okay. I think we want to make sure that everyone is in agreement that we are talking not just about the schools, we're talking about the schools in the town and the people who live in town, whether they have a direct relationship to the schools. They have an expectation for what they want out of being able to participate in the culture of Granby as we go along.
Yeah.
And you don't want to lose that
Mhm.
so the emphasis so far has been on the schools, and rightly so. They're the ones who find themselves strapped for money in a way that they make clear everyone understands every year. But that can't be the total focus.
No.
Now, membership. We got three groups.
I think leave it as it is. The select board basically can be representative of fire, other departments, missile departments, stuff like that. We obviously looking at the finance and the school committee because it's the biggest part of the budget. And we expand to the extent that in the event that we need more information as part of the process of what we're doing, we can go to those various departments and get the information and have it brought back. But in terms of membership for the moment, I think the 3 committees is plenty.
Well, the select board have the town administrator. Reporting to the town administrator are quite a few departments, including all the big budget departments, the police department, fire department, the highway department. But there are a lot of independently elected officials, including some who have financial backgrounds, which I think is key for this, but also some who maybe have the ear of the people in a little different fashion from the way others are. For example, the treasurer, tax collector, and clerk are key individuals in the town operations, but they do not report to the select board.
I mean,
and they're in
do we know if they'd be interested in participating?
no, I don't know that. Don't know that.
I think that would be the question I think to ask first.
Right. But before we ask the question, just kind of what our thoughts might be on whether or not any groups like that might be important, and whether or not there ought to be an offer to the public at large if there are people who would want to participate.
I believe you said earlier, though, that the size of the committee is almost a little unwieldy
Well,
at
that's
this level.
Yeah, no, but that's what I'm kind of holding off on the next piece, which is what the real processes of the committee will be, how it's going to conduct its work. It's like saying, well, let's call a summit meeting in Hong Kong for June 12th and settle the nuclear structure of the world for the next 30 years. It just
But
doesn't
before we get
work
there,
like that.
before we get there, let's figure out who's paying for the hotel
So
bill.
a lot of people need to do real work before
Yeah.
you get to the
Yeah.
point of making
Yeah.
decisions.
Who's paying the hotel bill and the meals?
Right.
I think it should be expanded as appropriate, but for the time being, let's just start with these 3 committees. And then I envision we will have subcommittees afterwards, which the subcommittees may want to bring in some of those folks in terms of expertise and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's, I agree, that's certainly one way for the committee to discuss doing that is to leave the basic structure alone. But if we get a vigorous working arrangement through subcommittees of one sort or another, then there would be an opportunity to basically request other individuals, whether they're elected officials or just citizens of towns, to come to the meetings to participate around particular topics.
That makes sense to me.
Bob?
You're not sounding happy about this, Bob.
I'm not a planning person.
Okay.
I'm more of a nuts and bolts and that sort of stuff. And
Yep.
planning has never been a strong suit. I've seen too many plans
No, most
never
plans,
materialize into anything.
most plans don't work. Most plans are, usually things happen because you start tinkering with stuff. But I'd like the emphasis to be on, let's figure out areas we can start tinkering in. And that's really where this comes down to. So I think if this devolves into, let's do the big master plan, that's gonna be useless. I couldn't agree with you more. But I
We
think,
have a master plan,
you know,
which we paid
yeah,
50 grand for, which
no one uses. You know, I'm looking at it more along the lines of, can we come up with ideas that we can then tinker on and see what happens? That's more my emphasis here. Practical nuts and bolts. How do we make money? In essence, we're talking about an entrepreneurial activity, and entrepreneurship is all about tinkering, it's never about planning.
Okay, procedures. I think we need subcommittees for doing actual work.
Yeah, I have some thoughts about this. if, on the aspect of how do we grow the pie, I think what would be good to do, maybe not the first meeting, but at a second meeting, to take the big committee, break us into groups, basically, let's say 4 groups, each having a finance committee member, a select board member, a school committee member, and go through a brainstorming exercise. And the brainstorming exercise would be centered on what wild, crazy ideas can you throw up on that whiteboard that could make the town money, either as a business venture, private partnership, or new way of grant money, that type of stuff. Crazier the better, and actually conduct a brainstorming activity. Everyone fills out the whiteboard. Everyone then basically, each of those groups gets to say, here are ideas were, et cetera, et cetera. People get to vote. These are the ones we think are most promising. And you can bring the subcommittees down then to taking those more promising ideas and exploring and investigating, can this be done?
All right, that's one aspect of the income, is
Yeah.
possible new sources of revenue. But we also have, and that's really a much longer term kind of planning, unless somebody has some idea of just something that happens immediately.
The way you do it, and I've done this,
Yeah.
both facilitating and basically being part of it, is you show up with the big easel,
Right.
things that stick to the wall. You hand out highlighters. You hand out basically the magic markers. You explain to people that the goal is crazy idea, as many ideas as you can think of, no judging, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
They
And
write it down
that's
and fill it out.
very important to get across that idea
Yeah.
to people. So
Yeah.
it's the only way to do real brainstorming.
Yeah, no judging allowed,
Right.
all that type of stuff.
Right.
And I think it might be helpful to actually do this at this June 14th meeting, or a meeting immediately afterwards, because that gets the juices flowing. That breaks it out of a just we're all sitting around shooting the bull type of discussion. We come armed with, basically our big post-it note boards, come armed with magic markers, and run that exercise and see what comes up with. I think that'd be a fruitful thing to do. It certainly gets them out of the comfort zone.
Yeah, but it may be too soon.
No, I agree.
And it may be too soon, and it may, I think you'd have to think a little bit about whether or not that's the kind of thing that, particularly as an initial start, works better with a smaller group.
Well, brainstorming, you actually want a bigger group, break them into.
Right, but
yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
a smaller group that was more comfortable originally,
Yeah.
and has been thinking about this for
Yeah.
a little bit.
Yeah. And for that, we may also want to bring a facilitator in to do it. But I think an exercise like that at some point in the relatively near future makes sense. And of course, crazy ideas are welcome. And that's not really a procedure, that's an exercise I think we want to explore.
Yeah, now, should we have separate committees looking at income ideas, separate committees looking at town services ideas, subcommittees looking at defining what a school system should be?
Well, the goal is, at this point, is raise money. And if we go through a brainstorming exercise and then we all vote on most promising ideas, I envision separate committees to say, okay, promising idea A, who gonna be on the working committee to see what do we need to find out more about this promising idea to see if we can actually bring it to fruition. Now, that's not necessarily just on ideas for growing money. It could also be ideas of better way to do the school, or a different way of methodology of the accounting and stuff like that. Could be all sorts of stuff.
The only thing I'm concerned about, I think, is that if we push an emphasis on additional sources of income, that people are going to lose sight of two things. One is that the most likely expectation for additional sources of income is down the line quite a ways.
Yep, long range.
And the second thing is that even with additional sources of income, you still have to make decisions about basic town services and school education. For example, it's easy to see that if the idea is well, let's make an international high school a reality.
Yeah.
Then what you're doing is you're bringing in a lot of money through the school system and on the school side. So that would, I think, then create a bias towards saying, well, let's just spend that money on the schools.
Oh, no. I agree with you, but I think
And so without doing all the rest of the stuff,
yeah.
That could be looked upon as a savior for the school system to run a very small school for Granby students and have all the money that they need to do that, rather than take a look at what the fundamental issues are.
No, I agree, but I think this is sort of a walk before we run type situation. We're in a situation now where we don't have money. That's the bottom line.
Yeah.
And the walk part is, okay, how do we get money? The failure rate on this stuff is tremendous. So to a certain extent, what we're talking about is a Hail Mary pass anyways. But if we are fortunate enough in going through that process that we get one or two hits, where, online high school for the high school works and they make money, blah, 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 then that's the time to have that discussion as opposed to, because it'd be a useless discussion to have later on if it never comes to fruition.
Although we need people to think about town services and
Yeah,
defining
we do.
town services. And again, I don't think that for all the initial kind of ideas to be generated, that it's a good idea to have a large group of people involved in that. In particular, that would probably be, I think, one of the key areas that we'd be trying to get input from people outside the committee.
That's right.
Because everybody has need for a police force, a fire department, highway department.
Yeah, I agree.
And so, independent of whether they're elected officials or not, you could get some very valid input.
Yeah.
And certainly the early feedback that you need from the town citizens.
I couldn't agree more.
So I think maybe we would suggest that we at least split up into looking at town services issues and school issues.
I agree with that.
And I think we asked the question, are we open to consultants for part of the process?
I would recommend we use the word facilitators. Consultants has got the connotation of people that charge you money, supposedly come up with solutions. We're going to have to come up with the solutions ourselves, but it'd be helpful to have people who can facilitate the communication and the process for us to do that.
Okay.
We paid consultants for the master plan. That didn't happen.
No, it happened.
It happened?
Oh,
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're gonna build sewer and water all the way out to the Belchertown line.
I have a question, different subject. Is there natural gas in town?
No. Well, no, I take that back. Yes,
Where?
New Ludlow Road,
Okay. How about up Pleasant Street into South Hadley?
I think so,
Okay. Right.
but I'm not 100% sure. And I don't know if any homes are tied into it. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it could conceivably just be a line that runs through.
Mm-hmm.
But I think New Ludlow Road has it. It has water,
Yeah.
but that's only recent, so I think that they had,
And who would own it? Berkshire Gas or?
I don't even know their names anymore. It
Mm.
used to be Bay State Gas
Yeah.
out of Springfield.
A question for the general public, if anybody is watching the show and you know about any availability of natural gas in Granby, please get in touch with one of the finance committee members and let them know what you know about natural gas in Granby. Thank you.
All right, back to it.
Yeah, that study that was done by the Pioneer Valley Planning Commission. I mean, I don't think it's has it done anything? Has it caused any kind of activity?
I don't even know about it.
It wasn't. Yeah, you don't even know about it.
Yeah.
I was one of the people interviewed by them for it.
Mhm.
So, I mean, it hasn't driven, as far as I know, very much activity. We had some additional studies about putting in sewer lines and things like that, and the costs just seemed to be prohibitive for
Yeah.
what we were going to get and what the expectations were. So now, my understanding.
The engineering firm's the only one that enjoyed the study.
Yeah.
The engineering firm for us to lay out the lines, because they get
Mhm.
a contract, which materialized to nothing.
I've heard there may be some state road projects along 202 that would entail
There are.
tearing up
Yeah,
202, so that
they're talking about that.
we may have an opportunity to reduce our cost if the state basically will not charge us for what we would normally pay for tearing up a road and putting in sewer line and then
Mhm.
repaving the road. If it's part of their project, there might be a way to cut some costs. So, but I don't know for sure.
It's not enough of the cost.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. I mean,
The costs were so far out of line that saving the cost of paving where you
Mhm.
dig it up. And what they're putting in is between Five Corners and Lyman Street and South Hadley. In other words, from Route 33 to Five Corners is the area that's being done. And we already have sewer in there, so obviously if there was anything that needed repairing or replacing, it would be, the time to do it would be now. But I don't know that there's anything in there. It's what, 25 years old roughly?
That's a real kind of a separate issue. What did the last study say? Has anything happened? Okay, we're trying to find some of that out. What kind of information would we like to see?
Well, I think what kind of information should be gathered and what kind of ideas can be generated.
Say that again?
Not only what kind of information should be gathered, but also what kind of ideas can be generated.
Yeah, I think that we need, we have two kinds of things. We've got the income and we've got the outgo. Income, we have currently known sources of income.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we need to be able to have an understanding of that, or the people who are involved with some of these disputes every year need to have an understanding.
We saw that with the school committee.
Current resources.
They were saying, where'd you get this information? And we said, it's on the Sherry sheet, and you get it too.
If you didn't know where to find it, you could certainly call
Yeah, but in
Department of Revenue and inquire, and somebody
Mhm.
would be able to tell you where to.
yeah, and they need to, they should know how to do that. It's, pertinent for their planning too.
Um, so we're looking at sources, amounts, trends, projections.
Mm-hmm.
New income, we want to take a look at like the things that we call it short-term versus long-term. Short-term in the sense of not necessarily short-term, but things that would have a possibility of happening more quickly,
Mm-hmm.
and things which really take a long time to develop. If we want a major industrial complex in town, that takes a
Yeah,
long time to
and that-
develop.
Yeah, and then we have to look at, on those ideas, ones that pragmatically are feasible,
Yeah.
and the information you need to make that assessment.
And to think about, taking a look at towns around us, the way to have a situation where we're not just looking at property taxes.
That's right.
Because you can build all you want, but if all you're getting is property taxes, that's probably not going to provide you with the kind of
They're not.
income that you really need. It's just that
You
never,
need to,
never
you
does.
need other stuff.
Yeah. On the expenses, it's tied up with services, whether they're educational services or town services. But I think we're really kind of interested in the same sort of thing, what the amounts have been,
Mhm.
what the trends have been, the possibilities for altering either of those.
And it very well might be that this is all financially available data that we just put in some type of form that we do a data dump on and analyze that way. So
Yeah.
I would put a third category of information though. The third category of information would be if the aspirational purpose of this joint task force is, in addition to addressing the budget system and addressing additional source of income, but with the whole idea being, how do we make Granby the best town possible to live in, quality of life for its townspeople, and quality of life that will attract people to move to town. What's our definition of quality of life? What information can we gather that would define what makes for a good town, good rural town like ours, that people would be attracted to move here? Because, for example, someone might come along and say, we want to build a marijuana facility. And we will pay the town lots of money. Well, that answers the question in terms of, yeah, that's great. Lots of money for the town, solves a lot of problems and stuff. But if we have also made a determination about this is the quality of life type stuff of what we want the town to be like, we may say, no, that would not necessarily be a good idea. And I'm not saying, say, that someone offering to build a marijuana facility is something we would kick out, but I'm just saying, that's an example. So what information do we need, and what do we come up as a definition of good quality town life?
And
Depends
that's
whose backyard it's in. Depends whose backyard it's in.
Yeah, I mean, that's true, but you know, I mean, overall things that, you know, we've all talked about the study of the reason that there's, you know, the financial reason, not the social reason, the financial reason that everyone has a second income, is most of the second income goes to higher taxes for better school systems, you know, stuff like that. You know, so quality of life is defined as a good school system. Quality of life could also be defined as, you know, good cultural programs. Quality of life could be defined as, you know, better diversity in the town. Quality of life could be defined as, you know, restaurants that serve something besides pizza. You know, all that type of thing. What constitutes good quality of life that would make Granby a place that people want to move to?
Yeah, some of that goes along with trying to get an understanding of what the economic distribution, what the age distribution is
Yeah,
of
all
people
that.
who live in Granby now.
Yeah, as the base point. But then, what do we want it to become?
Right. You have to understand where we are, because that's really the short-term effect is going to have to account for that. And then, is that where we want to be, or do we want to make a change?
Yeah.
Find somebody to make a
You know,
change.
we've been traditionally a rural community. Do we want to continue that to be the emphasis? Is that, you know, can't be the emphasis because things change? You know, how do we look at all those issues?
Right now, Granby is technically a farming community. Didn't the town vote on that a few years ago? However it is that Granby wants to think of itself,
Yeah.
and get people out to town meeting to vote on, that has to match up with what the realities are
Yeah.
of running a town.
But can we also set a methodology where people come to us and say, I want to do this thing on my farm that's, you know, different in terms of the public coming in, blah, 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 that the town has infrastructure to support ideas that enhance quality of life?
Okay, all right. Let's call it quits for the evening,
Okay.
and I'll try to put some of this together. We'll come back tomorrow night with Scott and talk about some of the same things again. You can't make it tomorrow night, I understand it. Yeah. So, we have a meeting tomorrow night. We can't get, Jim's out of town. We can't get all four of us together on either Wednesday or Thursday, so it may not be worthwhile trying to get together again. We've got the town meeting on Monday night. I've got a West Street School Building Committee meeting on Wednesday night. We hope we have this joint meeting on Thursday night. So the question is whether we want to check back in together next Tuesday night.
For what?
Preparation for Thursday.
I think we're good.
I could just send this around,
Yeah.
final version.
I think tomorrow night.
It's basically just an idea list.
Yeah.
It's not an agenda, so it's.
I think tomorrow night and then town meeting, and then June 14th.
That sounds good to me, since I just looked at my calendar and thought, every night taken up with something. Okay.
Right.
If not, then nothing else before the committee. I'll take a motion to adjourn. Bob, we got anything else?
No, I don't have anything.
I'll take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Have a second?
All right,
Okay, let's adjourn for the evening. Thank you.
thanks.